Coming up in the news at 7 for this morning, Wednesday, October 28, 2020. Resistance in Lisa Hanna's Southeast St. Anne constituency to Hanna's bid to seek the PNP presidency is intensifying. Nationwide News understands DPP Paula Llewellyn's office has recommended that multiple criminal charges be laid on 2 soldiers implicated in a drug smuggling ring and a daring gun attack on the police. Still on crime, the police say a man who is believed to be a serial contract killer was one of 2 men fatally shot in a confrontation with lawmen Monday night. Scotiabank set to close several of its branches across the island. And in international news this morning, early voting in the U.S. election has now topped 70 million, more than half of the total turnout in 2016. Hails, I'm Tawna Thomas. Resistance in Lisa Hanna's Southeast St. Anne constituency to Hanna's bid to seek the PNP presidency is intensifying. Businessman and influential PNP activist Denzel MacDonald says Hanna or her surrogates must explain a series of high-profile breakdown of friendships and professional relationships involving her, which appear to paint her as a divisive force within the 82-year-old political movement. Mr. MacDonald is more popularly known as Wizzy. He raised the issues in a 6-page response to criticism from a Hanna supporter and another PNP activist, Karen Cross. Mr. MacDonald's letter was circulated to comrades last night and has been seen by Nationwide News. Ms. Cross, who now in support of Hanna's move to be elected PNP president in just over a week. During that letter, Cross accused influential forces in Southeast St. Anne of attempting to malign Hanna and chase her out of the constituency. Denzel MacDonald, who's a well-known businessman and a PNP activist within Hanna's constituency, has responded. Mr. MacDonald says constituency leaders are exhausted from being blamed for the breakdown of relationships with Ms. Hanna within their constituency. He told Ms. Cross that in her letter she accused several constituency leaders of being troublemakers. But the businessman and PNP activist says seeing that Cross is now the spokesperson for Ms. Hanna, he has a few questions for her, which she may pass on to Hanna for a response. Mr. MacDonald says it should be noted that there were 3 beautiful women who are genuine comrades who were Hanna's close friends and confidants. He says one of the women was employed as executive assistant to former PNP president Portia Simpson Miller. One was the party's deputy general secretary and the other a prominent member of the party's secretariat. According to Mr. MacDonald, the women helped Ms. Hanna with political work in Southeast St. Anne and were seen by the MP as being relevant. Mr. MacDonald says the Southeast St. Anne MP or her surrogates should indicate why is the relationship between her and the 3 key female comrades now broken down, and all 3 are supporting Mark Golding's bid for the PNP presidency, with 2 being part of Mr. Golding's campaign team. Mr. MacDonald says Hanna and supporters should also explain why her relationship with former PNP Region 1 Chairman Dr. Pauline Foster has soured, and Foster is now supporting Mark Golding's leadership campaign. The PNP activist said it's noteworthy that Spanish Town's Mayor Norman Scott, who was campaign chairman for Hanna when Hanna sought to be vice president of the PNP, has now publicly declared his support for Mark Golding in the upcoming PNP leadership contest. MacDonald, who's seen by some comrades as a kingmaker in Hanna's Southeast St. Anne constituency, says it's instructive that most of the comrades in Region 1 are not supporting Ms. Hanna. He says Hanna and her supporters must explain why her professional relationship with a number of prominent Jamaicans, including Robert Bryan, Delia Harris, and Faye Ellington, who served in various capacities at the former Hanna-led Youth and Culture Ministry, broke down. He says it should also be stated why, when Ms. Hanna was a cabinet minister, her ministry had to change 3 permanent secretaries in one term. Mr. MacDonald says PNP presidential aspirant Hannah and her supporters should indicate whether she's blameless for the deterioration of some key friendships and professional relationships, or whether she's a divisive force. In a recent newspaper publication, Ms. Hannah denied being a divisive force in the PNP. During a recent interview on Miss Kitty Live on Nationwide 90 FM, the Southeast St. Anne MP declined to respond publicly to specific issues raised by some of her constituency leaders. Nationwide News understands that Director of Public Prosecutions DPP Paula Llewellyn's office has recommended that multiple criminal charges be laid on 2 soldiers implicated in a drug smuggling ring and a daring gun attack on the police. The 2 JDF members are to be charged with shooting with intent, illegal possession of firearm, and dealing in ganja. They're also expected to be charged with taking steps to export ganja and possession of ganja. The soldiers were arrested 2 weeks ago in the Gutters area of St. Elizabeth, and 1,500 pounds of compressed ganja seized. The incident occurred at about 9:30 p.m. Both soldiers reportedly engaged the police in a gun battle prior to their arrest. The soldiers were in their military uniforms when they were arrested. 2 firearms were reportedly seized from the soldiers. The JDF says the police operation in which the soldiers were arrested came after it had tipped off the JCF about the possible involvement of one of the 2 soldiers in the repeated smuggling of contraband. The soldiers who are to be charged are being represented by Peter Champagny and Samoy Campbell. Still on crime, the police say a man who's believed to be a serial contract killer was one of 2 men fatally shot in a confrontation with lawmen Monday night. He has been identified as Ashada McFarlane, otherwise called Boise. The other man killed in the alleged gun battle Monday night has been identified as Jamil Smith, otherwise called Blackman. Reports are a team from the Counter-Terrorism and Organized Crime Investigation Branch, CTOC, was conducting an operation in Duncanspan, St. Catherine, linked to the kidnapping and suspected murder of 29-year-old restaurant supervisor Kenroy McPherson. According to the police, its team of investigators attempted to intercept a white Toyota Fielder in which the men were allegedly traveling. It's reported, however, that upon seeing the police, the occupants of the vehicle reportedly fired at the lawmen and a gun battle ensued. A Remington 12-gauge shotgun was reportedly seized. The men were pronounced dead at hospital. A third man escaped. Investigators have identified McFarlane as an alleged contract killer operating in the parishes of St. Catherine and St. Anne. The constabulary says McFarlane was wanted and was being sought in connection with 8 murders in 2020 in 3 St. Catherine communities, Linstead, Bogwalk, and Riversdale. He was also wanted by the St. Anne police in connection with 4 cases of wounding with intent, an incident of shooting with intent in which he allegedly fired at 3 members of the police force, and several robberies in Ocho Rios. A member of Jamaica's senior national men's football team, the Reggae Boys, is among 2 people injured during a shooting incident in Portmore, St. Catherine last evening that claimed the lives of 2 others. Dead are Jason Foster and O'Dane Jones. Among the injured is 23-year-old reggae boy Malique Foster. Reports from the police are about 8:30 last evening, a group of persons were playing dominoes on Fernanda Close in South Borough in the parish when gunshots rang out. When the shooting subsided, 4 men were suffering from gunshot wounds. They were rushed to the hospital where 2 were pronounced dead. Scotiabank is closing its branches in Black River, St. Elizabeth and Old Harbour, St. Catherine. The Black River branch is to be closed on February 21 and the Old Harbour branch on April 21 next year. Scotia has also announced that it will convert 6 other branches to digital only by January 2021. Those branches are Christiana Branch in Manchester, Falmouth, branch in Trelawney, Portmore branch in St. Catherine, and the Port Antonio branch in Portland. The bank is to also convert to digital the Port Maria branch in St. Mary and the St. Anne's Bay branch in St. Anne. Prime Minister Andrew Holness says the government has no new funding that can be allocated to deal with the damage caused by recent flood rains. He says the various ministries under the supervision of the Finance Ministry will have to comb through their budgetary allocation to find the funds needed to fit the hefty repair bill.
That this is about reallocation and not about new funding, as we have already gone through the second supplementary estimates, and therefore there is no additional funding for the government's response. This is now about each ministry, each minister, each permanent secretary going through their budget line item by line item to see what it is that we can reallocate. And this will be supervised, obviously, by the Ministry of Finance. And I did that process today, going through the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation's budget to see what we would be able to do. And I was supported in that regard by the Minister of Labour and Social Security, who went through his budget to see what he can do.
Mr. Holness says Jamaica suffered an estimated $2 billion worth of flood damage following recent heavy rains which affected the island. He made the statement late yesterday afternoon in the House of Representatives.
Madam Speaker, the estimate for flood damage included in the report that has been presented by the NWA is preliminary, as the agency is unable to access all points in the field in order to comprehensively assess the extent of the damage to infrastructure and the cost of permanent repairs. The preliminary damage estimate, Madam Speaker, is close to 2 billion Jamaican dollars, and that's preliminary.
The Prime Minister says that preliminary figure is expected to rise as it doesn't include the cost of permanent repairs. However, he notes that based on the extent of the damage, the government will need to triage its response efforts.
Madam Speaker, based on the extent of damage and the cost, all the required works cannot be immediately done. Accordingly, the government is proposing a program of targeted interventions with a priority ranking as follows. First priority would be to reopen blocked roads. Then cleaning of critical drains, which are now heavily silted, and then patching of main thoroughfares.
Meanwhile, Mr. Holness says none of the recently constructed roadways in the corporate area have been adversely affected. He says, however, some 60% of parochial roads were affected.
Madam Speaker, in addition to the impact on the NWA roads, there has been significant impact on parochial roads. 60% of parochial roads were affected, with the KSA, St. Catherine, Clarendon, and Manchester being those most greatly affected. The estimate is being finalized, but preliminary indications are that the damage to parochial roads and drain networks will run in excess of $700 million.
Prime Minister Andrew Holness. And in international news this morning, early voting in the U.S. election has now topped 70 million, more than half of the total turnout in 2016. Many of those casting their ballots early are seeking to reduce their exposure to the coronavirus. Joe Biden campaigned in the key state of Georgia on Tuesday, which Democrats hope to wrest from Republicans. He made a scathing attack on Donald Trump's handling of the coronavirus crisis, saying the president had failed the U.S. President Trump held rallies in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nebraska. Trump again questioned the integrity of the election, saying it would be inappropriate to take extra time to count postal votes. And that's it for the news at 7. I'm Tonna Thomas.